Could be more ready. Do we have testimony from the other commissioners?
All right, you are good to go.
Calling to order this hearing or roundtable of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. The time is 9:05 in the morning, and this hearing or roundtable is being conducted virtually. It is available live via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform, which you can find on the chairman's website, www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. Again, www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. And this hearing will be available on the council's website and cable TV within a few days, assuming it's uploaded today. The subject of this hearing is vacant and blighted properties in the District of Columbia. And for this hearing, we have specifically reached out to and invited witnesses from the different ANCs across the city. This committee has held a hearing on vacant properties a couple of weeks ago. I believe it was on May 10th, where the testimony was limited to and focused on the director of the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, Ernest Charapa. And vacant properties was the subject of our oversight hearing in March. I believe it was March 18th. Which was our annual performance oversight hearing for DCRA. We will continue to press on this issue, but I thought it would be useful for us to reach out to the ANCs and hear what they had to say. The idea for this actually came to me from the auditor's report, the auditor of the District of Columbia, Kathy Patterson, who issued a report in September of 2017 regarding the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs compliance and enforcement efforts under the vacant and blighted property law, which is part of our nuisance property law in the district. The auditor reached out to ANCs, identified 31 properties, and issued a report in September of 2017, which was very critical of DCRA's inconsistent enforcement and lack of record keeping, as well as lack of explanation for why properties were or were not being taxed as vacant when they were or were not classified as found by an inspector to be vacant. And those problems seem to be continuing. Research consistently shows that vacant and blighted properties have myriad negative effects on the surrounding area, including reductions in the value of nearby homes, and increases in crime. The purpose of this roundtable is to hear from advisory neighborhood commissioners about vacant and blighted properties in their districts that have been particularly problematic, including what, if any, action the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs has taken to address issues raised by ANC commissioners and residents about the properties. We have 12 ANC commissioners who have asked to testify. I have written statements for some of them. I have to emphasize the written statements from each of the witnesses would be very valuable to us because I don't have the ability to take notes on all of the details that you might be testifying as to specific properties. So I urge that we get written statements from each of you. The record in this matter will close on June 1st. That would be at 5 p.m. on June 1st, 2021. I'm going to ask all of the witnesses to come into the witness room, and they are, every one of them is an ANC commissioner. Randy Speck from ANC 34G, Trupti Patel, who's with ANC 2A03, Peter Wood, who's a commissioner ANC 1C03, Allison Brooks, who's a commissioner with ANC 4B08. Kyle Mulhall, who's a commissioner with ANC 2B09. Rochelle Nigro, who's a commissioner with ANC 6E04. Carla Lewis, who's with ANC 5E06. Tyrell Holcomb, who's a commissioner with ANC 7F01. Renee Bowser, who's with ANC 4D02. Vanessa Rubio, who's with ANC 4C01. Paul Johnson, who's with ANC 4C07. Chuck Elkins, who's with ANC 3D01. And Commissioner Aryan Bouquet, who's with ANC, I can't read this, 4B03, I believe. And I'll take you in that order. I think that order is the order that you signed up. And after I hear from all of you, I will ask some questions. I might, if there's something that's short, interrupt with a question. So we'll begin with Commissioner Randy Speck from ANC 34G. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Middleton, for holding this hearing. It's obviously an issue that has been important to you and to all of the commissioners, I'm sure, as well. My testimony, my written testimony was sent to you last night. Our commission approved it last night at our meeting by a vote of 6-0. The testimony focuses on 7 properties in our ANC that we found to be vacant. We identified those by contacting our constituents, and they reported on these vacant properties. I think they are illustrative of problems that exist probably all over the city, but certainly within our ANC. And so the testimony goes through them in some detail, and I'm not going to go through all of that detail in my oral testimony. But I will highlight a couple of instances and then draw some conclusions from that. The first property that I'll focus on is 2900 Military Road, which you're very familiar with because you have asked questions about this both at the oversight hearing and in the hearing with the director on May 10th. There have been a couple of interesting developments there. I've spoken with the lender to the developer, who put up the money initially to buy the house. The lender is quite disturbed with what's happened, and they are looking for a way out. And they have, in working with the developer, have gotten the developer to put the house on the market for sale. It's on the market now for about $1 million. There is now, as you're aware, I'm sure, DCRA has gone back and retroactively identified the house as vacant. It is also blighted, and it's been recently identified as blighted by DCRA. As a result of that retroactive imposition of the vacant tax rate, there is now about $118,000 in back taxes, penalties, other assessments that have been made against the property. We are concerned that because of DCRA's delay in getting this done, and because they did not put the incentive on the developer to either complete the work or sell the property earlier, now that very large tax assessment could be an impediment to being able to sell the property. It's actually more than 1/10 of the price of the house, and it will have to be settled before the house can be sold. So what I'm urging is that I don't let the developer off the hook at all for all the things that have happened there, or DCRA. But at this point, the community really wants the house to be sold to a reputable developer and somebody to live in that house. And so what we're most interested in is working out an arrangement with the bank and with the developer so that the house can be sold within the next few months. Now, the next house I'll talk about is 6005 Utah, which is a house that I'd walked by many, many times and didn't really realize has been vacant for 30 years. It has been identified by DCRA on at least 2 occasions in the last 4 or 5 years on the vacant property list. And then inexplicably in 2020, it was taken off the vacant property list, no longer appeared there. The house is exactly the same as it's been for 30 years. No changes have been made at all, except it's further deteriorated. At no time, however, did OTR impose the vacant tax rate. And so for this entire time period, it's been taxed at the residential rate with a senior exception and homestead exception. And so it's been undertaxed for a very, very long time. The house is in terrible condition right now and completely uninhabitable. The third example that I would point out is really two houses, one on Morrison Street and one on Nebraska Avenue. They're owned by the same owner. And in both of these instances, the owner has sought and obtained construction permits repeatedly, serial construction permits for repairs and alterations. And sometimes they've gone year after year after year with these construction permits, a new construction permit or an extension of the construction permit. And DCRA has just simply gone along with that. They've not apparently inspected the house. They've not determined whether the construction work was actually being done. And in fact, it was not being done. And so those properties were exempted from the vacant tax rate because there was an active construction permit. Now they're finally acknowledging, DCRA is acknowledging that this house has not been under construction. Excuse me, it is not, there's no work that's been done. And for both of these houses, they are in extremely poor conditions. They are both vacant and have been for a very long time. They need to be identified as vacant properties and taxed at that appropriate rate. Now, there are, as I indicated, several other examples in our ANC of similar kinds of problems with vacant properties, but let me just draw the conclusions that we reached from this experience. First, DCRA has not systematically identified vacant and blighted properties, and it relies too heavily on residents to determine when it will conduct inspections. It should develop a program to solicit information on vacant and blighted properties and conduct timely investigations. It should consult with and use information from residents and ANC commissioners to inform those investigations. And it should provide timely, substantive feedback to ANC commissioners on the results of the inspections. Asking ANCs to file FOIA requests, as DCRA has suggested in a number of these instances, is a barrier to what should be a collaborative process to fix problems in the district's best interest. Those who live in the affected neighborhoods can be among the DCRA's best resources. Second, DCRA should develop better protocols to ensure that vacant and blighted determinations are reflected promptly and accurately in OTR's property tax assessments. Our experience demonstrates that even when DCRA finds a property is vacant, OTR frequently does not reflect that status in its tax records. Not recording an accurate status means assessments and penalties are not being issued or collected, and properties are left to deteriorate, potentially lowering the value of other properties in the neighborhood. Third, DCRA permits owners to use a succession of bogus construction permits to avoid Class 3 vacant tax rates. DCRA should conduct inspections to determine whether construction work is actually being undertaken pursuant to the permit and revoke permits or deny extensions when property remains vacant and no work is ever done. The incentive of vacant tax rates could stimulate owners to complete permitted work. Fourth, DCRA's focus should be on creating incentives that encourage owners to correct blighted properties and to occupy vacant properties. DCRA should promptly identify and impose financial penalties on vacant and blighted properties. Otherwise, owners may incur overwhelming tax burdens before they can take corrective action. Finally, the council should examine the criteria under which the property could be considered vacant or blighted to ensure clarity and to facilitate enforcement. Whether the council initiates this review or not, DCRA should issue implementing regulations to spell out its standards for what constitutes vacant or blighted property. The standards need to be specific and enforceable, and inspectors will need to be trained to apply those standards rigorously. At a time when the district has been described as having a housing crisis, it cannot afford to leave valuable properties vacant and blighted. It is obvious from our commission's experience that this problem is more widespread than many realize, and there are glaring shortcomings in DCRA's enforcement. We urge the council and the mayor to take steps that will restore our existing housing stock to productive use. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And you're chairman of the ANC, correct? So I could say thank you, Chairman. I will have some questions for you after we're done with the testimony. Commissioner Trupti Patel. And good morning.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Chairperson Mendelson. My name is Tripti Patel, and I represent the historic Foggy Bottom. And I'm testifying in regards to the vacant and blighted properties that are impacting the quality of life in my single member district. As a matter of fact, there are two troublesome properties next to one another on I Street Northwest. For the first one, which is 2501 I Street, the following issues have been brought to my attention. There was a gas leak reported by neighbors to the fire department, which prevented a great tragedy. As of 6 months ago, DCRA did declare the property as blighted, but much to the frustration of surrounding neighbors, there is still no traction on this issue. Neighbors have consistently pleaded with the homeowner to maintain the property for health and safety reasons, and it continues to fall on deaf ears. There seems to be no recourse with this property owner as they get the fines dismissed/waived due to age and economic status. As for the second property, it is 2507 I Street. The claim to fame for this property is that an individual crawled through the broken boards into the basement where she passed away due to a drug overdose. DCRA was also notified of this incident, and once again, neighbors expressed their frustrations about not seeing any concrete action to address them. As of yesterday, I've had other residents reaching out to me about two more properties that are not being kept up maintenance-wise. 931 25th Street Northwest has not seen anyone entering or leaving the residence, no lights on and overgrown plants, being flagged more for a health and safety check issue. The final property is at 920 Snows Court and is better known as Nash Stable. As of last year, the fire department put out a notice, and surrounding residents are expressing concern over the rate of deterioration of the structure. Vacant and blighted properties impact the surrounding property values, and it forces immediate neighbors to deal with rodent infestations and having to see random individuals use these properties as temporary crash pads. The issues of vacant and blighted properties have impacted my neighbors' quality of life for many years. They're understandably frustrated by the process, the rules, and the regulations that DCRA must follow. I'm hoping that my testimony will be able to get some traction and progress from my neighbors having to deal with this for so many years. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Commissioner Patel. Commissioner Wood, Peter Wood.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me here. So, yeah, also here to voice similar concerns. It's been interesting because I've been, during this process of preparing for today, our ANC has been trying to gather kind of a mini database of properties in our ANC. And just through that process, I kind of realized how it's logical to try to rely upon the neighborhood associations and ANC commissioners to try to gather that information. But even then, we're beacons of a lot of information by definition, and it's been really difficult, which is kind of to go to my point, which is that enforcement we have the mechanisms in place in theory to enforce a system that can lead to the problems I'll mention in a second, or resolve the problems, I'll mention in a second, but it doesn't seem to be happening. So a couple of issues that I think are interesting. When I was just campaigning to be commissioner last year, that really came to my attention. They're anecdotal, but I think they kind of represent a deeper trend. And I should have introduced myself. ANC 1C in Adams Morgan, 1C03 specifically has two historic districts, the Colorado Triangle and Washington Heights, which I think is particularly interesting because if anywhere in the city, at least according to the way that things are written, should make it easy to keep properties from being blighted, you'd think it's a place that has historic preservation in place, but I guess that's a bit beside the point for the time being. people seem to be very upset just within my specific SMD over the state of how their past commissioner, how past commissions, and the District of Columbia in general was handling their numerous inquiries over 2 properties. So one, I was actually, now a constituent reached out to me discussing a property, which is actually 2 addresses, which are 1836 and 1840 Calorama Road Northwest. So this is a really big, potentially beautiful property. But I was invited to a neighbor's home who alarmed me just how negligent the property manager next door had been. And part of the issue, and I see this in neighborhoods like in Adams Morgan, which isn't necessarily the case elsewhere, where you have property owners who will pay the taxes, pay the fines over years and never step foot in the property for as much as a decade. I've heard of cases where people don't even live in the United States anymore and no one's been to the property. And this was alarming because one of the neighbors not only has had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to repair their walls because of the negligence next door, but during this pandemic, with pre-existing health conditions, contracted the coronavirus and just showed just how immensely dangerous this is as a health concern. And on top of that, going back to being a historic preservation district, going back to how there's a housing crisis in the District of Columbia, we have properties that are going completely vacant that property could, I don't know specifically, somewhere between 5 to 10 units just in one house. And instead it's literally just rotting. And another interesting little anecdote, when I was speaking to some now constituents on the street, it was during the census data collection. So a census worker actually came up coincidentally while we were chatting on the sidewalk, and they said, excuse me, can you, either of you, help me find this particular property owner in this co-op? And the person I was speaking with knew that person. They said, that person, as far as I know, hasn't been in the United States for years. We've actually had issues where we had to dig with a shovel all of the belongings to get to the bathroom because there was a leak in the plumbing that was affecting the other properties in the building. So I guess it just reiterates my point that this is a health concern. This is also a housing equity concern. And I don't even necessarily know that we have to reallocate too much money in the budget. Of course, it's budget season for the next fiscal year, but we do have the mechanisms in place to really use the appropriate agencies to regulate this and not have to rely too much on people like myself. Happy to do so, but I just don't know if we're well positioned to do that. And even still, I think that this is especially important to take in the context of, as ANC commissioners, we're sworn to serve the District of Columbia as a whole. So this is not a cookie cutter solution. Some neighborhoods, we have blighted properties because of a lack of access to wealth and equity to be able to maintain them. In neighborhoods like mine, depending on the property, we see it's quite the opposite, where it's simple negligence. Every property owner, I guess, deserves to have their voice heard. It's especially difficult when they're evasive. So we can't let them say their side if they're not particularly willing to cooperate. But I think, those are the 2 main points that I've seen, and I'm voicing from a lot of constituents who are not only similarly concerned, but literally have had their well-being put in jeopardy simply because people that own multiple properties decided not to take care of one of them. So I don't think that I'll be the only person to voice those similar concerns, but thank you for letting me have the chance to do so today.
Thank you, Commissioner Wood. Commissioner Brooks, Allison Brooks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. So as the chair of the 4B Commission, I'm here to represent all of the 4B commissioners as we ask for your help to address vacant and blighted property enforcement. In our opinion, at the heart of the issue is an inconsistency in objectives. While the city focuses on lost revenue associated with vacant and blighted properties, ANC commissioners and residents are focused on related quality of life concerns associated with the properties. Within our commission, these properties often become rat-infested dumping grounds, and they create additional concerns for other agencies like DOH. These vacant and blighted properties also become embarrassing visual reminders of ineffective programming that's not helping address the original issue or is not resolving the concerns of DC residents. It is the policy or the goal of the district to put vacant properties back into use. One of the available tools is a vacant property tax. And while homeowners pay 85% per $100 in the valuation of their homes, The owner of a vacant property pays $5. Not only do the higher rates help cover city costs associated with nuisance properties, but in theory, this creates an economic incentive for the owner to put the property back in use. But as we've learned, in some cases, DCRA is not even collecting the money, which then begs the question, is it really an economic incentive? In many cases, DCRA is not doing anything about the property until they're notified or pushed by residents to do so. So the city's charging additional tax dollars, but the vacant properties are not being maintained or secured. And it's not hard to find examples throughout our commission. Specifically, while there are a plethora of vacant properties, it's difficult to get a property classified as vacant. In one example, in 4B02, there's a house that was unoccupied for over a decade. The owner passed away a few years ago. The property is maintained at a bare minimum level, and even though no one's lived there in 10 years, DCRA will not deem it as vacant. And thankfully, due to resident pressure, the current owner has agreed to sell the property. That's yet to happen. For properties that are deemed vacant, the properties must continue to deteriorate. Sidewalks are blocked by overgrown shrubs, and we must make multiple reports to DCRA before they'll address the issue. There are often times when we request to DCRA, the requests that we make, to DCRA are closed out without any apparent action and no follow-up with the commissioners. And while Donald Sullivan, the program manager for the vacant properties program, is very responsive, we can't support our entire commission, the entire ward, or the entire city without a larger team of people to support him. It's not clear to me why we wouldn't have a program manager, at least for every ward, and then support teams under those. We need to find ways to encourage the property owners to rehabilitate and occupy their vacant and abandoned, deteriorating residential properties, which ultimately would stabilize some of the neighborhoods, specifically inside of my SMD, by decreasing the number of vacant and abandoned properties and potentially eliminating and transforming vacant and abandoned eyesores into engaged and occupied homes. This morning, when I was driving my daughter to school, I drove down the 100 block of Kennedy Street and counted 3 vacant buildings in one block. We listed a few examples. There's at least one inside of every SMD, but specifically in 4B02, 6700 6th Street is a vacant property that's been cited and fined several times. And again, other than the bare minimum of mowing the grass, when cited by DCRA, the owner has taken no steps to maintain the property. In 4B05, there's continued dumping on lot 69, which is at the intersection of 8th Street Northwest, Longfellow Street Northwest, and 9th Street and Madison Street Northwest. It's a square. Because the gate is not maintained or locked, people often dump hazardous materials and refuge. In 4B06, 205 Nicholson Street Northwest is vacant and blighted, and it's already been cited and fined. It'll have to be fined again, but the owner has not made any improvements after the initial fine. In my S&D, 4B08, 6109 3rd Street Northeast is a vacant home that at one point had no roof and was collecting rainwater, which then became a breeding ground for mosquitoes. For more than a year, I worked with DCRA to request that the house be deemed a blighted property. I was left with the impression that the property would be raised because it was an eyesore. The property remains unattended and unaddressed by both DCRA and the owner after being blighted since January of 2020. We even had squatters enter the home and had to work to get them removed. 119 Missouri Avenue Northwest, I said Northeast in my written testimony, but it's Northwest, I can correct that. Residents moved into a condemned building, removing the DCRA condemnation sticker on the door, and reside there currently. 119 Kennedy Street Northwest is a vacant building and is on everyone's radar because people dump furniture, garbage, unwanted cars in and around the property. It's become a breeding ground for rats, which we're trying to reduce. At 5612 First Street Northwest, the house is owned by a developer who owns many properties along Kennedy Street, none of which are developed. They used the property at 5612 First Street to dump the debris from all the other sites. They put up a 6-foot fence, so now supposedly no one can do anything about it. Fines were issued by DCRA, DPW, and DOH. The quality of life for the neighbors next to the property is significantly impacted. While DCRA fined the owner, DCRA didn't clean the property or ensure that the owner cleaned it either. We had become a thorn in everyone's side for a year or more. before the property was moderately clean. It's still dirty today. The rat infestation was so bad, there was a distinct odor, and eventually the rats ate the wiring underneath the next door neighbor's car, rendering it undrivable. There's also a breeding ground for rats, which we're trying to reduce in that location as well. 4B09 at 5732 5th Street Northeast. There are abandoned trucks, vehicles, motorcycles, trash, debris, a gaping hole, and a broken lock off the door, which is affecting adjoining properties at 5728 5th Street and 5734. At 5506 4th Street Northeast, there's a vacant lot that actually has snakes, raccoons, and other wildlife. A DOH worker fell while trying to inspect the lot. There are small children that live next door, and we would like to fence off the lot, which would require DCRA to engage and address the issues. We're asking for your assistance and getting DCRA more involved in resolving these vacant and blighted properties. But what we've learned is in some cases, the reports that we're making to the people that we've been told are our points of contact don't make it to the people that are actually responsible for the vacant and blighted properties. So there's clearly some disorganization and inconsistency in how properties are addressed. And what we'd like is your assistance in making sure that these properties are addressed more consistently. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brooks. Commissioner Mulhall? I believe you're not here. Commissioner Nigro.
Hi. Thank you, Chairman Mendelson, for holding this hearing, for the opportunity to talk about vacant and blighted properties in 6E04. I am the commissioner for 6E04. I'm also the chair of the commission. Let me introduce you to some of the infamous vacant properties that some of them actually have nicknames. The Hoagie House, located on the corner of 4th and N Street Northwest, a very large property with an overgrown side lot, convenient for drug users, squatters to take advantage of, along with graffiti artists. The Big Greenhouse, located on the corner of M Street and 4th Street, known for tall grass and being a permanent landmark that's been an eyesore for decades. The Orange House, located in the middle of the 400 block of M Street, a significant historic property that has now fallen by the wayside, that has been under construction for more than 5 years, known for trash and exploding porta potty, defecation, and urination. Lastly, the property at 4th and Ridge Street, also vacant for years, that the owner has done nothing. Easy access for the drug users, drug sellers, and violence. After many interactions with the government agencies, whether it be with DCRA or the Office of Tax and Revenue, nothing substantial happens. Where is there a tipping point? At what point does the DC government take significant action against these homeowners and developers? More increased fines, higher taxes, new laws? Why do my constituents have to deal with years of these eyesores in the neighborhood, concerns about property values, increased crime and garbage, etc.? I do not know what to say anymore to my constituents when they ask me for guidance and assistance. The city has been talking about vacant and blighted properties for years and nothing happens. It is now time to take action where these properties can move forward and make 6E04 a better place to live. Why is this considered acceptable? It is not. On behalf of all of my constituents, we refuse to accept the inaction of the DC government against these property owners. There is a clear lack of project management between the two agencies, DCRA and the Office of Tax and Revenue. Simply put, you need to do something. We have been talking about this forever. I am done talking about these properties, as are my constituents. It is literally insane. We are a great area, but these 4 properties just diminish the neighborhood. Do something.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do you have a copy of your statement?
I'm going to send it to you.
Okay, please. Commissioner Carla Lewis?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Carla Lewis, as you mentioned, and I am here today to talk to you about ANC 5E06, which covers a portion of the Bloomingdale and Truxton Circle neighborhoods. And I have lived in these areas for over 35 years now. Today, I'm here to bring to your attention several vacant blighted properties within my single-member district that myself and constituents have raised concerns about with multiple DC agencies. My hope is that today the council will not only take note, but take action to stop these property owners from holding on to vacant properties while there remains such a deficit in housing within DC. It is to draw attention to the problems that are causing for the residents. Residents are scared to pass by certain areas. These vacant properties are being used as encampments for drug activity, and this is for selling, buying, and using drugs. And it's resulting in crowding, obstructing, and incommoding on public space. And last but not least, it is a health hazard to the residents in the area, as it often results in people urinating and defecating on the homes of the residents that live nearest to these vacant and blighted properties. And it also harbors rats because there's just so much trash in the area. These issues can no longer be ignored by the DC government. The drug activity is resulting in violence, and action needs to be taken before another life is lost. The first property that I'd like to bring to your attention is 1600 North Capitol Street Northwest. This property is located at the intersection of Florida Avenue Northwest and North Capitol Street Northwest. If you drive north of Massachusetts Avenue or along the North Capitol Street Northeast and Northwest corridor, you would have had to have seen the crowds of people hanging out on the corner outside of this lot. The lot is known as the Joe Mammel Lot. The property used to be an Exxon gas station. In 2007, the property was sold and has been vacant ever since. For more than 13 years, the owner developer, who's also doing business as Florida and Q Street LLC, and the 5Q LLC company Joe Mammel, has managed to use old laws to obtain extensions and delay development. Meanwhile, the property has become an open drug market. As I mentioned before, residents cannot pass by their area. They always look for ways to avoid the crowded sidewalks and obstructed sidewalks there. We are constantly told by MPD and the DC government agencies that there are no loitering laws. Yet when I looked it up, DC Code clearly states that section 22-1307 addresses crowding, obstruction, and incommoding, yet nothing is being done about these people hanging outside these properties, selling drugs all day and night long. I'd like to bring to attention the timeline on extensions that have happened with the zoning commission. In 2006, a PUD was submitted. In 2007, a PUD was approved. In 2009, there was a 2-year PUD extension. In 2011, there was another PUD extension. In 2013, there was another PUD extension. 2013, there was a PUD modification. 2016, a two-year PUD extension. 2016, a PUD modification. 2018, a PUD extension. And again, after a meeting that was just recently had by my ANC, the lawyers for the developer stated that they were going to request another PUD extension in 2021 as a result of COVID. This is just ridiculous. I looked it up last night, and the property, just last year, the property had been paying taxes at a commercial rate, even though it's been vacant since 2007. So it's just correct that I wholeheartedly agree with the commissioners that have testified before me about the fact that these properties are paying lower tax rates, even though they're vacant and blighted properties. This issue was just corrected in 2020 when it was brought to the attention of the Attorney Generals. These are often nuisance properties as well. And because, you know, if they aren't cited on the number of times having drug violations, they aren't really noted as being vacant properties. Not too long ago in 2011, William Robert Mitchell Jr. was shot to death on the corner of North Capitol Street Northwest. In August 2020, Aaron Watts was found dead in a unit block of Bates Avenue, but it was believed that he was stabbed on the corner of the unit block of Florida Avenue Northwest, where this property is located. Another property that I'd like to bring to your attention is on at 1214 and Q Street Northwest. These abandoned lots and vacant properties are now where some of the vulnerable populations have set up tents. And there was a shooting at this encampment on Monday, April 12th, 2021. There's also a property at 200 Rhode Island Avenue Northwest. This property was recently discovered as vacant, but not taxed at a vacant rate. Residents have reported that the physical condition of the building continues to worsen. They have complained about, the grass growing tall and rats being in the area, as well as the dilapidated condition of the building. And last but not least, there's a property at 234 Florida Avenue Northwest. This is supposed to be a cafe. There's no development that has been done on this cafe. The owner comes from Virginia on, a regular basis to grow fruit and vegetables on the property. And he tells me that it's too expensive to open a business here in DC. The grass on the property and outside of the property are overgrown. As previously mentioned, these vacant properties being used as encampments where drug activity is causing crowding and obstructing and incommoding on public space, and it's a health hazard to the residents. These issues can no longer be ignored by the DC government. And I hope, again, I want to reiterate that action is taken by the DC government before another life is lost. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. And it would be helpful if you gave us your statement. You gave some details that I wasn't able to copy down.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure.
Commissioner Tyrell Holcomb. I'm told he is not here. Commissioner Renee Bowser. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and council members of the Committee of the Whole. I'm Renee Bowser, an ANC Commissioner for Single Member District 402 in Petworth, DC. I'm testifying in my individual capacity. In addition to notifying COW of the longstanding vacant structures in my SMD, I'm hoping to get a clear understanding of the process and timeline for getting vacant and blighted structures corrected or removed. The vacant and blighted property of major concern to many SMD 4D02 residents is located at 5414 2nd Street Northwest. The existing house at the address is not vacant and blighted. In fact, the owner rents the house to a tenant, but the property owner began construction in the rear of the property sometime in 2017. The rear structure is as large as the existing row house and takes up most of the rear yard. A stop work order was issued near the end of 2017, but the owner resumed construction without permission. I was able to secure a stop work order on the property in January 2018. Once construction was stopped, the entire structure was draped in blue tarp. There appear to have been no changes to the structure since the beginning of 2018, and the structure has been so neglected that the tarp has fallen away from most of the structure and cluttered the alley behind the house for some time. Recently, a nearby resident who is a skilled craftsperson said he believes that the structure is eroding and may be unable to withstand another harsh winter. And the same resident believes that the structure is being used for drug activity. However, I have no hard evidence to confirm that claim. I've complained to DCRA about this structure many times to no avail. I've talked to people at DCRA several times to no avail. The other vacant and blighted structures are along the 400 block of Kennedy Street Northwest. These are 4-unit apartment buildings at 429, 431, and 433 Kennedy Street that have been vacant and blighted for years. Amid the high grass and trash at 433 Kennedy Street, Coloma River Capital displays its sign, one of the many properties owned by this speculator developer. These properties should be continually monitored because actual tenants live in buildings along the same block and suffer because of these unsightly, trash-strewn properties that are haven for rodents. Finally, I asked the council to require DCRA to inform ANC commissioners of the process, including the projected timeline for remedying the conditions at these properties. The timeline the agency is pursuing to remove illegally constructed vacant and blighted properties whose owners have failed to make any attempt in many years to bring the structure into compliance with the law. That concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowser. And Commissioner Bowser, we don't have a copy of your statement.
I will send it in.
All right, that would be very helpful. Commissioner Vanessa Rubio. Is she here?
No.
Commissioner Paul Johnson is ANC 4C07.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good morning. I am Commissioner Paul Johnson from ANC 47. I'm also the chairperson of ANC. Our ANC, however, I'm speaking in capacity of my single member district. Word about our ANC though, we begin at Georgia and New Hampshire and continue all the way up through Missouri Avenue. So a major sort of commercial spine of the district is within our area, catchment area, as well as up to 16th Street and Rock Creek Church Road. I would like to make a couple of comments centered around training and interagency cooperation when it comes to DCRA and ANC's ability to sort of navigate that and to sort of understand the intersection between DCRA and MPD or the Department of the Environment. There's a lot in order for ANCs to be effective advocates to deal with vacant and blighted properties. This sort of needs to be understood. So I would urge in any reform of the process or improvement when it comes to DCRA that capacity issues with respect to ANCs be figured into that solution. I've taken some initiative to sort of call people and try to better understand the process myself, but I think that it should be more codified. With respect to my S&D, there's a particular, speaking of Georgia Avenue, there's a particular property at 4328 Georgia Avenue Northwest, which is on the corner of Georgia and Webster Street, that is just in a disgraceful state. The owners of the property are based in Virginia. Fortunately, we've had the occasion to work with the deputy Mayor of Public Safety to coordinate along with residents on the abutting apartments on Georgia Avenue, behind on Iowa, further up on Webster, in conjunction with MPD and others to compel some of the blight, but it ebbs and flows of when the grass is overgrown, obstructing public space, all of not developments too dissimilar of what you heard to this point about it attracting unsavory actions and behavior and element. But I think the point is that that's a particular problem. The solution to the problem is pulling agencies together. And I think that agencies need more capacity about how to work to do that in that regard. Another problem property that is sitting is 1006 Webster, which is right on the corner of Webster and Iowa, across the street from a middle school, McFarland. It's been sitting for some time. Windows and get and blasted out. I think there's some placards that have been on there, but nonetheless, it's been sitting for quite a while. And the last point I want to make with respect to that is, it seems like developers perhaps have properties and are sort of sitting on them. And I think that that's something that the council should consider. We've just been through the resolution of this iteration of the comprehensive plan. And there's a lot of, I suspect there's a lot of bidding clippers on properties that they hold that they are letting fall into disrepair. I don't think that serves anybody well. And I think that the council should be mindful of that and hold developers to account that have properties and are sitting on them and let them fall into disrepair to the detriment of all of us. So thank you for your time. I just wanted to offer those comments about ANCs needing more institutional support, perhaps from the Office of ANCs, more training about how to navigate through this process and how it intersects with other agencies. And lastly, particular attention to developers who hold properties and are sitting on them and let them fall into disrepair. This is especially prevalent on Georgia Avenue, starting from Missouri all the way down, and particularly in my SMD through on Georgia between Varnum and I would say Buchanan. There's several sort of dotted properties that are falling into disrepair. And I think it's a problem. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. And I don't have your statement either, and that would be helpful, please.
I will send it. Thank you.
Commissioner Chuck Elkins. You're muted. Commissioner Elkins, you're muted. I can't hear you. You'll have to start over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry about that. One of these Zoom things. I did send in my testimony this morning. I hope you will either have it now or will get it.
Yes.
Secondly, I want to say that of all my fellow commissioners here, I probably know the least about this topic, but I chose to testify for two reasons. One is I want to make the point that this is a citywide issue. We do have these issues even in Ward 3, but much less than my colleagues here, I think, in other places in the city. Number two is I wanted to commend you for asking ANC commissioners from across the city to help you deal with this problem. A number of us commissioners are trying to work citywide on issues like this. And we're preparing for the budget on OANC next week, in which we will be proposing that OANC have some resources to help ANC commissioners work on issues like this, which we consider to be constituent issues. OANC believes that it is not the duty of OANC to support commissioners in constituent work of this sort. And so we think that should be improved. So I want to commend you for reaching out to ANC commissioners. Now, we do have a particular outstanding blighted property in my Wesley Heights district, and I'll go through it briefly and then to try to draw some conclusions from it. It's 2207 Foxhall. This is a case where a couple bought this property after it had been vacant for some years, deciding to tear it down, and then other people decided it should be a historic, designated as a historic farmhouse, and they succeeded in that. The couple tried to move the house to other places. That didn't work, and so they gave up and moved to Maryland. And then has had two additional owners, and the first owner said, let's move the house to the front of the lot so I can put an addition on the back. He wanted to cut down 4 trees. The forestry unit and DDOT only let him cut down 2 trees, so he couldn't do that. The bank is foreclosed. The owners put the property into bankruptcy. In the meantime, the grass is overgrown. There are dumpsters and trash bins filled with water. You'll see in my testimony, there's some pictures that show this house is up on stilts, waiting to be moved. The district is owed back taxes. The neighbors are being told that they can't sell their property because they have to wait till this property gets fixed. So there's plenty of blame to go around here. It appears that the District of Columbia has so far acted in a disjointed and uncoordinated manner, with no person in the district government seeming to be in charge of looking at the whole situation and trying to solve the problem of getting this property unblighted. DCRA occasionally gets the grass cut and has designated the property as blighted and informed the tax office, which that's good, but it's not enough. And the Historic Preservation Board did its usual thing without concern for the consequences, and urban forestry acted to protect the trees, but was not focused on the consequences of their actions either. And so my main point here, Mr. Chairman, is no one seems to be in charge of getting these properties back into the marketplace and turning it into a win-win for everyone. It's not clear to me that DCRA or any district agency or combination of these agencies really has enough authority to accomplish this. Other cities must be grappling with this issue. I haven't done the research to find out what they're doing, so I will make a few suggestions without really full knowledge of what I feel I should have to make these recommendations, but I'll be brave enough to do it anyway. It seems to me that just witnessing this testimony today, the real energy for fixing these problems is in the neighborhoods. It's in the ANCs, the civic associations, and the neighborhoods, and yet we're not tapping into that energy. And we keep saying we wish DCRA would fix this. I'm not sure we've given them the tools to fix that. It seems, if I understand this correctly, that what we've got are we're imposing economic incentives on these owners with the hope that those economic incentives are going to change behavior. Just in the paper today, we noticed the federal government is imposing economic sanctions on Belarus for what they did with that airliner. We may feel good about that, but is it going to make any changes in Belarus? By the same token, we ought to be asking here, are these economic incentives actually working? And if they're not, do we need to change those economic incentives, or do we need to add additional tools? Do we need to have more authority on the city to condemn these properties in an expedited basis and still recommend, being cognizant of the property rights of people to move these properties forward? One suggestion I would have is maybe create an ombudsman office who would work with neighbors, ANCs, and DCRA and the other agencies to try to tackle some of these most long-standing issues. And instead of just saying, well, okay, we had an inspection and then move on to the next project, to really see if we could bring these projects to a conclusion. And in that regard, I might say that other agencies have found it useful to have periodic meetings with ANCs to talk through the list of issues and see how to make progress. So for instance, the police department has police service area meetings. The Department of Transportation meets with our transportation committee on a periodic basis to go through these projects. I don't see that kind of action out of DCRA, and I think it might, in the form of an ombudsman, might allow some bird dogging of these very serious properties to either fix them or identify for you and the council, these are the impediments of why even with a concentrated, focused area, we are not able to bring these properties around, and here's what we need to get them fixed. And in the meantime, I think, as has been suggested, DCRA needs to have a tougher hand. Maybe you need to give them more authority, that when a property has been vacant for several years, they shouldn't be able to just go in and get a permit and have all the penalties or tax changes taken off. Instead, they should be put on a very short leash and make sure that they are, in fact, not using bogus excuses to get by. Maybe we need to change some of the regulations, the laws, to allow to do that. And finally, I would say, if we haven't done the study about what other cities have done to fix this problem, perhaps we have, I don't know. I'm not a student of this area, but if we haven't done that study, we should commission that study and get it done, because every single city in this country, I'm sure, is struggling with this problem. And there may be some creative ideas out there that we haven't thought of yet. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner. And the last witness that I have is Commissioner Aryan Rodriguez Bouquet with ANC 4D03.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson.
Good morning.
Good morning, and fellow commissioners. My name is Aryan Rodriguez Bouquet, and I'm honored to represent Single Member District 4D03 as its Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner. And today I'm testifying in that personal capacity. My testimony today is a little bit different than my fellow commissioners in that it's about the process of getting the properties to be identified as vacant properties. In the 5 months I've served as ANC Commissioner, 2 vacant properties have been and continue to be a focal point for affected residents: 417 Ingraham Street Northwest and 5302 5th Street Northwest. Both are 2-story row houses located in between inhabited properties. Plans for 417 Ingraham show a possible conversion to 3 individual units to be built out quite extensively in the rear. And 5302 5th Street Northwest appears to be a renovation of an existing property. While work seems to have temporarily ceased on both properties, they remain in as-is condition with significant concerns. The property at 417 Ingraham has an entirely exposed rear building, meaning that the exterior wall has been completely removed with a blue tarp, a gutted porch, and piles of brick and debris. According to DCRA, the approved permit for that property is for interior work only. The property at 5302 5th Street Northwest has boarded windows in the rear, and affected residents are concerned about structural damage as a result of porch renovations that do not match what is in approved plans. There's currently no status from DCRA as to whether that is or is not the case. I really appreciate your question about the impact of vacant properties, Chairman, because the answer is not as simple as illegal or poor construction was conducted and told to stop. Now what? Affected residents are dealing with quality of life issues, as previously mentioned by fellow commissioners, such as trash and rodent concerns, obstructions in alleys, structural damage that may have lasting impact on neighboring properties, including potential lead poisoning. As the resident succinctly said, the property on 417 Ingraham Street is in worse shape than it ever was and is now not only vacant, but uninhabitable. The impacts do not just stop at quality of life, however. The amount of time invested in learning and navigating systems like Scout, or keeping track of conflicting correspondence and taking the time to research and respond, takes a toll on individuals whose job this isn't. and we actually still have no information as to why there's been a pause in work or next steps in either case. DCRA has unfortunately been part of the problem, and while they've helped in that work has temporarily stopped, recurring themes that present themselves in my communication with affected residents about DCRA are those of confusion, inconsistency, unreliability, and frustration. Residents receive partial responses to inquiries, some of which are contradictory, if any response is received at all. We're currently going on 4 weeks with no response to our most recent request for information on both properties, and this includes raising one thread to the level of the agency director. It is also not clear why some inspections that are scheduled do not take place, or how certain permits are reviewed and approved. I can completely understand and appreciate that this pandemic has had a significant impact on all agency operations, as can our residents. Those whom I communicate with often acknowledge this up front. But as their most local representative and as a resident of the neighborhood myself, it frustrates me that we cannot receive clear and timely communication from the agency meant to help. I asked our affected residents for their recommendations on how to effectively tackle the problem of the vacant properties. And again, this is leading up to the process of getting them declared as vacant. The following 4 recommendations are those that they shared combined with mine. The first is that DCRA should not issue permits for demolition and construction separately if both will take place on an existing property. Developers should have fully approved plans and must adequately brief neighbors before they start doing any work. Second, with each notification by the developers to neighbors regarding work to be conducted, DCRA should require that an informational sheet be included with clear instructions on where neighbors can locate permits, view plans, and what their recourse is if they observe that the contractors are not adhering to those, including a phone number to call. This at least puts some pressure on developers to conduct work above board. There seems to be a gap between inspections resulting in the bare minimum versus having done due diligence, and disclaimer that this does not apply to all inspections. But for example, when there's a complaint by a resident, the inspector should be provided a bulleted checklist of what to inspect. Further, there should be a review process by the inspection once it's completed by the agency against approved plans. And the inspection report should also be sent to the complainant for their record. And then finally, there should be more than one point of contact assigned to field and respond to ward level A&C communication. So in closing, the issues regarding these 2 properties predate me as commissioner, which concerns me. DCRA's mission is in part to protect the health, safety, economic interests, and quality of life of residents. And residents are more often than not the eyes of DCRA. They should be viewed as partners in this work. Thank you, Chairman, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I do have some questions. And a lot of this testimony has been very helpful. And I want to remind those commissioners who didn't give us a statement in writing, please do so, because I'm going to be turning to these as I do my oversight work. So a couple of commissioners expressed some frustration, as in the council should do something. So let me explain what my thinking is, and then I'm going to go to some questions. For better or worse, the council doesn't run the executive side of the government. I think you all know that. So we're limited to oversight and what we can do through our oversight authority or our legislative authority. And while the law concerning vacant properties and blighted properties is a bit complicated, it's not as ambiguous as DCRA sometimes claims, which it sometimes claims because some of the vacant property owners try to take advantage and are pretty good at gaming the system. What has become clear to me through oversight that I've been doing the last several months is that things have not changed at DCRA since the auditor issued her report in September 2017. And a careful reading of that report will reveal that DCRA is not clear in its record keeping. It's not standard in its approach. It actually sometimes will classify a property or find a property to be vacant, but then fail to communicate that to the Office of Tax and Revenue so that the property's tax status doesn't change. And then it will inexplicably change the tax status, the classification. And there are not explanations in the record. And it's just, I'm going to say confusing, but not confusing in a way that we could change by law, but confusing in a way that reflects I'm going to say incompetence. Now, I have sent several letters to the Department of Consumer Regulatory Affairs asking specifically about some properties and also highlighting contradictions in what DCRA is telling the council with regard to these properties. So if commissioners feel like DCRA is not being responsive or is being contradictory in its responses, it's doing that for everybody. I have subsequently asked the Attorney General to pursue False Claims Act litigation against some of these property owners. And I have also asked the Director of DCRA to take disciplinary action with regard to some personnel. This is what we are doing because it is clear that DCRA is not doing a proper job. I want to say it's checking the box, but it's not even checking the box with some of these properties. And we're going to continue to use oversight pressure to force some change in DCRA. And I'll remind commissioners that the council last year passed the Department of Buildings Act to split these functions off of DCRA and create a new and separate department. So let me ask some questions here. I'm going to begin with Commissioner Speck from ANC 34G. I think I had 5 questions for you. You had suggested with regard to 2900 Military Road that the taxes could be a burden to the sale. I think you testified that the developer bought the property for $780,000 maybe, and it's
$790,000, I think. Yeah.
And is listing it for over $1 million. My view is why can't the developer pay the taxes out of the proceeds from the sale?
Well, my understanding from talking to the banker, and I haven't talked with the developer specifically about this, the developer no longer talks to me. But the banker said that there are a lot of fees that have been incurred as well by the bank. I think he's been completely delinquent in paying down any portion of that loan that he got. And so they said that either and this is an LLC, as you recall,
yes.
That could just walk away from this and with very limited liability. And so the bank is ultimately holding the bag here. And they told me that they're thinking now about reducing that price from $1,050,000 down to something around $900,000 because they don't think it's going to sell at that price. They do think it will sell at a lower price. And they said that they will lose money, is what the banker told me, on this deal if it sells it at $900,000 or around that. They're willing to take that loss, but he said that if there is this $118,000 in assessments against them, against the property, they will have to rethink what they're going to do with it, whether they'll foreclose or whatever they'll do. I don't know. But he said that they would have to rethink it. And ultimately, those fees are going to have to be paid by either the banker or the purchaser, which will increase the price of the house that they would have to sell for. So I think the developer is going to get off the hook. I regret that. I think that's not fair, certainly. But because it's an LLC and they can just walk away from it, I suspect they're just not going to ultimately have to pay those taxes.
Well, but I guess I want to put on the record here that there's a precedential effect to
yes,
things that are done. And developers have figured out that they can get a permit and do no work and not be classified as vacant. Well, similarly, they could figure out that, well, we'll just wreck the property, wreck it, and then get excused from the taxes and walk away. But rather than belaboring that, you mentioned 2 houses that were owned by Cornelius. I can't remember if that's a first name.
Donnelly, Cornelius Donnelly.
Has any work been done on either house by him? And maybe
No.
Any significant?
None that's visible that I can see whatsoever. And as I indicated in the testimony, the permits, there have been construction permits year after year after year after year. Some of them extended and some of them new permits. And so, no work's been done so far as I can tell.
So is it your testimony that those permits were essentially fraudulent?
I hesitate to go that far because fraud is a matter of
Okay.
intent, and I can't.
Bogus, I'll say
They're-
bogus. Those
Bogus
permits
is
are
a word.
bogus.
Bogus is a word I used in the testimony.
In your written statement, you said repeatedly, but I wanted to just understand this for sure, that either you or other commissioners on your commission have tried to talk to or meet with the DCRA investigator, but have been refused?
Yes, I do have an appointment with one inspector tomorrow morning for the 6005 Utah Avenue house. He communicated directly with me, and I've arranged to meet with him at the house tomorrow. Otherwise, DCRA has told us in no uncertain terms that the only way you're going to get the inspection report is through an FOIA request.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that as well. I may want to follow up with you to get more detail on the what I guess we agreed are the bogus permits.
Right.
So if you could be prepared to help me with that, I'd appreciate it.
I'd be glad to help you with it. I think I've exhausted what I could find online with regard to those permits, but I'd be glad to help in any way I can. I've been following that, particularly the house on Morrison Street, since 2015, when the neighbor first brought it to my attention. And I've been looking at the various permits that have been posted there, many of which now they expire and nothing happens and continues.
Let me say, and I appreciate the work that you did. There was a lot of information in your written statement, Commissioner Speck. I recently went out and looked at a vacant property that was identified at the at our March 10th, excuse me, May 10th hearing. And I went out and I looked, and on the door were all these, maybe not on the door, on the windows next to the door were, must have been like a couple dozen notices from DCRA, from vacant property to stop work order. And my staff went and looked up that property in Scout, maybe some of the other databases, because I think DCRA has 3. And the stop work order is posted on the window, but not in Scout. So
Yep.
I've learned that and I've heard this before, and it was in Kathy Patterson's report, that DCRA's databases are simply not accurate.
I would confirm that.
Let me move on. Commissioner Patel, thank you for your testimony. I did have a few questions for you. You talked about a couple of properties on I Street, and when you spoke, you said 2501 I Street, but in your written statement, it's 2505. Is it 2505?
It's 2505. I apologize. I didn't realize I misspoke.
And do you know how long they've been vacant?
Actually, it's been for quite a few years, from my understanding, from the constituents I've spoken to. This has been an ongoing issue. They have been very vocal speaking to DCRA, and DCRA usually comes back and states that they have certain guidelines that they have to follow, certain procedures, which I understand, but it is just a cause of great frustration because one of the owners, because DCRA has to follow certain procedures, has to notify her that they're going to the property. And then that property owner runs to the property, and appears to live there for the short duration that a DCRA inspector is there. And then because the inspector has to write, property owner is on site, appears to live here, once again, like DCRA's hands are tied. And so, the frustration is that many of the surrounding neighbors have vocalized that the property owner is gaining the system and is actually like laughing about it, is like knowingly we're gaming the system. She claims her age as a factor. She claims her economic status as a factor. As some of my fellow colleagues and commissioners have said on here, DCRA can say, okay, we'll slam you with the fine. And then she'll claim, I can't afford to pay the fine. Or, you're picking on me because I'm of an elderly age group. And, and this is where that frustration comes in, because DCRA has been made well aware of this. And even if they're saying everything that they are hearing is true, that, the property owner has rights. And, and I understand that I don't want anybody's rights being violated, but at the same time, neighbors are losing, their property value is declining. They're seeing rodent infestations increasing. They're seeing people starting to use these, vacant and blighted properties as places where they can sleep during the day or kind of lounge around, and which is causing, safety concerns. People are starting to, be fearful of walking down that particular area of the neighborhood once it gets dark, or if it's early morning hours.
Well, the vacant property tax is in a way a blunt instrument at trying to get property back into use. The challenge here, I shouldn't say challenge, the problem is that DCRA is not being very, no, the DCRA is being lax with regard to assigning the correct classification and then ensuring that that classification holds. There was a property, I'm going to be writing about this in my newsletter. I've written the last 2 newsletters about vacant properties, and I'm going to be writing about a couple more in my newsletter this week. And if anybody's interested in seeing the newsletters, go to chairmanmendelson.com, and you should be able to get a link to the newsletters. There was a property where the owner challenged that the property should be classified as blighted and submitted 46 pages of evidence, including 4 single-spaced pages of argument why it shouldn't be classified as blighted. And DCRA sent to the Appeals Commission a 4-sentence reply. One of the 4 sentences was "see attached." Another of the sentences was, "we stand by our classification." I mean, it really, their response was anemic. But so DCRA has known for years, Commissioner Patel, that these properties on I Street have been vacant?
That's correct. From my understanding, that is correct, Chairman. And, working with the DCR liaisons at the time, they were very, responsive. They'd come out. We actually had, a special meeting around this. It actually got very emotional, very contentious, because neighbors were saying, well, we're willing to do X, Y, Z. And, the DCRA representative at the time was saying, I hear you, I understand your frustrations, but we are obligated and we can only do X, Y, Z. And so I don't know if, DCRA is, inability to be more effective and more efficient is because their hands are tied by red tape by the council. I'm not sure, but all I can say is that, the staff is great, but I've always had to deal with them saying, well, it's red tape issue, or, well, we're only allowed to do X, Y, Z functions.
Yeah, don't let them off the hook. Trust me, I've looked at some of these properties. Don't let them off the hook. Now, you mentioned 931 25th Street. How long is it vacant?
You know what? That just actually got brought to my attention yesterday. And the constituent made it a point to say, I don't think it's vacant or blighted, but was deeply concerned because she has now seen that property falling into a state of disrepair.
So you don't know whether it's been reported to DCRA? and
That's correct. That's correct. The neighbor just informed me as of yesterday because she recalled that I was going to be testifying before you today. And so she just sent me a message, with, several neighbors, emails attached, just kind of saying like, this was a neighborhood concern that they're not seeing, so they didn't know what to do. So, I mean, I don't know if, getting our constituents more involved or giving them like empowerment to, kind of help amplify and put pressure on DCRA to get these properties attention or fixed would be incredibly helpful. I mean, I know my ANC colleagues are, can always use more amplification and help, especially in situations like this where, we need to task a government agency to intervene.
Finally, let me ask you about Snow's Court. Where is Snow's Court?
So Snow's Court is on 25th Street, and depending on what side of the street you're on, if you're coming from the Metro direction side and you're walking towards Pennsylvania Avenue, it is going to be on your right-hand side. And so it's literally an alley that you go through. And
Okay.
and Snow's Court has many townhouses there. It is under historical preservation. And so Nash Stable, I know, has been an issue because it has historic preservation attached to it, if I recall correctly. But the surrounding neighbors are seeing that the structure is deteriorating.
Do you know if it's classified as vacant? Do you know if it's been reported as vacant?
That I do not know. All the neighbors know is that the fire department had come by actually I think July 2020, and they put a notice on the structure. And so I do not know if DCRA has been notified or any of the neighbors have called. And I mean, if I need to call or make put in an official notice, I'm willing to do that. But once again, there's also this disconnect of, I think sometimes agencies don't want us to know the avenues and recourses of, putting pressure on them to do the things that neighbors need, which is to make sure they feel safe and not have to live around crumbling structures or structures that are becoming health and safety hazards.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Commissioner Wood. The two properties you mentioned on Calorama are 1836 and 1840.
Hi, so they're the same, I'm pretty sure. I'm not exactly sure how it works in terms of classification, but like the neighbors refer to it as kind of a joint property. I'm pretty sure it's the same property owner. It's one of these townhomes that used to be, I forget if it was this specific building. I'm literally looking at it right now. But if it's that one or the neighbor one, there's a few that used to be, like one used to be a school for deaf children. So it's a larger property that's been split in kind of horizontally into different units. And it's two immediately adjacent ones. As far as I've been told, it's referred to as both of those numbers, but it's the same property conjoined like that with two, I guess.
And how long have they been vacant?
I don't know the exact time frame. I mean, the neighbors have told me that it's been a matter of years. I don't know the exact time frame. I should look that up, but I know that it's been a very
and
they reached out to me just because it's been so long. Yeah.
Do you know if DCRA knows that they're vacant?
As far as I should double check. As far as I've been told, yes, they do. And I think they've even done inspections in person and just nothing came of it. It was kind of, from what I was told, I wasn't here for it. It was kind of a walk through the motions, but there was no enforcement thing. Yeah.
Yes. Is 2920 Ontario Road, that's over near the zoo, is that in your ANC?
It's not in my SMD. I think it might be in Adams Morgan. What's the address again?
2920 Ontario by the zoo.
Give me like
Adamsville Road, is that in your ANC?
That's 1C04. That's another commissioner, but still Adams Morgan.
Yeah. Because I've been putting some heat on DCRA regarding 2920 Ontario Road. It is, I believe, a 40-unit apartment building.
Yep.
And I ran into a neighbor after I looked at it who said it had been vacant for 40 years. I don't know if that's true. It has been a long time. And it's a multi-unit apartment building that is vacant. And it's been a real struggle to get DCRA to classify it properly. Some years it's actually been classified as class 1, which is the 85-cent rate. And if you look at it carefully, there's some broken windows, the roof is falling apart. Those are all criteria for blighted. And DCRA just simply is not aggressive about that. Thank you for your testimony. I think Allison Brooks is no longer on, am I correct? It's an opportunity for her to. And let me see. Commissioner Lewis, Carla Lewis, I know you're still here.
Yes, I am.
We were able to check a couple of the properties while you were testifying. 1600 North Capitol. If I'm traveling north on North Capitol, that would be the northwest corner?
Yes.
Yes, I'm familiar with the site. I don't remember it was a gas station, but Art All Night was there one year, about 4 years ago.
Yes, it was there several years ago, yes. Mhm.
Yeah, that's being currently taxed at the class 2 rate, which is not the vacant rate.
Well, my understanding, I looked at some of the tax records last night, and I did see that some action was taken, and I did see something about a vacant property there. There was a vacant property green sign listed on the property, and I see now that there are back taxes owed of $141,000, just over $141,000, and they have been paying the same rate, the same amount of taxes that they have been paying the last 13 years or so, more or less. So I don't know if they're aware of the fact that they're at a vacant rate now, but the taxes that are due now are over $141,000. And I do see that there were 2 tax sale delinquent notices that were issued on the 27th and the 28th of April.
Yeah. We also noticed that 200 R Street, 200 Rhode Island Avenue is being taxed at the vacant rate.
Yes, this was something that happened recently, because I think there was a notice in there that it was a vacant property, but the rate wasn't taxed. It wasn't changed to be taxed at a vacant rate. And my understanding is that that was recently changed. I didn't look at that last night, but through discussions by email, that is my understanding.
And you're going to provide me with your written statement?
Yes, I will.
Okay, because one thing that would be helpful, if you could include how long you know these properties have been vacant?
Okay, well, I did for 1600 North Capitol Street Northwest. It definitely has been 13 years, maybe longer.
And to the extent you know the other ones, if you could put that in your statement, or to the extent you don't know, if you just know that it's been a number of years, what I'm looking for is whether it's recent, or you know how long, or that it's been a few years, or.
Yeah, it's been a few years for all of the properties that I mentioned. But I will figure out what the numbers of years are and put that in my statement.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Commissioner Renee Bowser. The issue with 5514 2nd Street is it's an addition, illegal addition.
It's 5414. Yes, it is. I'm not sure how because it's so big, it's about the size of a house. I'm not sure when we had to people have to get special exceptions to have a deck a foot longer. But it's been there for several years now, and there's been no continuing construction. Again, I'm not sure how it could get into compliance. I've been complaining for several years now, and now I'm starting to get reports from nearby neighbors. People used to just ask me about it. Now they're saying.
But the main house is occupied.
Yes, it is occupied. It has a tenant. In fact, one of the sons of the tenant, also a tenant, was saying he would appreciate having, so they would appreciate having some backyard. But if it's becoming, they let the tarp, the owner let the tarp lay in the alley, and it still has part of the tarp on there, but it's just, if it falls, I wasn't looking at it as something falling, but as I say, a neighbor of mine who lives across the street from the structure, who's a skilled craftsperson, was saying that he believes it's going to collapse. And then.
Sure. But I think this is more of an issue of illegal construction rather than vacant property. Even though the addition is vacant, the property, the house is occupied.
Yes, so their structure, so the structure can't be considered vacant and blighted, even though in factual terms it is. I'm not sure. I've complained about the illegal construction. I'm just trying to find any avenue I can to get it removed. And particularly now, and I noticed in taking the most recent pictures of it, that the foundation is not as in good shape as it was a couple of years ago.
Well, why don't you contact DCRA or have the ANC take an official position and contact DCRA to have DCRA remove the addition as a nuisance?
Well, I've asked them to. I didn't get even though I'm chair of ANC 4D, I did not ask for a resolution, but I can do that. But I've asked
that the addition is a nuisance, and that if the owner won't remove the addition, then DCRA will come in and abate the property and fine or charge the owner. But let me ask you about the Kennedy Street apartment buildings. Do you know how long they've been vacant?
Several years, about 2 or 3 years. And I've noticed that they have changed ownership, some of them, because looking at one of the databases, a couple of them were purchased the end of last year, the beginning of this year.
But they were vacant before then?
Oh, correct, yes.
And you believe they've been vacant for 2 or 3 years?
Yes.
What about, do you know when it was reported to DCRA?
I reported it a couple months ago because I reported some things in the back where there was trash in the alley. I reported that over the last couple of years, but asking them to treat it as vacant and blighted just recently.
And are the properties blighted? What's their condition?
Oh, they are, well, there's some boarding up, there's high trash, excuse me, there's high grass, weeds, and there's trash that has been, I don't know who put the trash in the weeds, but that just lays there. At the foot of one of the steps, there's a big concrete block. So yes, it's in pretty bad shape, and I've sent photos into DCRA.
Well, according to the law, and let me see if I can pull this up. This might take me a moment. In making a determination that a vacant building is a blighted vacant building, the mayor shall consider the following: whether the vacant building is a subject of a condemnation proceeding, whether the vacant building is boarded up, and failure to comply with the following vacant building maintenance standards. So boarding up suggests blighted, but not necessarily means it. The maintenance standards are doors, windows, areaways, and other openings are weathered tight and secured against entry by birds, vermin, and trespassers, and missing and broken doors, windows, and other openings are covered. The exterior walls are free of holes, breaks, graffiti, and loose or rotting materials, and exposed metal and wood surfaces are protected from the elements and against decay or rust by periodic application of weather coating materials such as paint. And the maintenance building standards also include all balconies, porches, canopies, marquees, signs, metal awnings, stairways, accessory and appurtenant structures, and similar features are safe and sound, and exposed metal and wood surfaces are protected from the elements by application of weather coating materials such as paint. So if there are boards, that would suggest these buildings are vacant, are blighted, but not necessarily. If there is rot or deterioration, I mentioned apartment building where the roof was deteriorating, bricks were falling off. That would be blighted. If there are openings, like broken windows, that would be blighted.
Yes, there's some broken windows, yes. I'm looking at the photos over the last.
Okay. Well, we did a check while you were testifying, and those 3 properties are classified as class 1, which means that they're not classified as vacant. Let me see, Paul Johnson, Commissioner Johnson, do you know when these properties you've mentioned were reported? That's 4328 Georgia and 1006 Webster?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think you had mentioned
Do you know when those properties were reported?
the properties. Do I know if they were reported? I believe that 4328 was reported. I am not sure about 1006 Webster.
When do you think Georgia Avenue was reported?
I've been a commissioner for 5 months. I'm not sure preceding that what has been reported or not. I do know that even prior to my election, I've been in a community organizing conversations with abutting neighbors on Iowa, on Georgia, on Webster, and that corner property has contributed to some neighborhood sort of nuisance and criminality and behavioral health problems. So that I've been in conversation with that for about 8 months. But to your point about a specific 311 complaint or DCR complaint, I am not sure for 4328 Georgia. But on 1006 Webster, I've seen placards, enforcement team placards on the property, which is a multi-unit building across the street from a middle school for some time. And it's been sitting vacant for some time. It's anecdotal.
Okay. That was my question for you. I see that Allison Brooks has come back. Commissioner Brooks? Commissioner Brooks, Allison Brooks? I see her here, but she's not responding. I'll give her another chance in a moment in the hopes that maybe she just stepped away. Commissioner Elkins.
Yes.
I thought you're kind of letting DCRA off the hook.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think you've heard me testify a number of times about DCRA, and I'm a constant critic about their need to take more enforcement actions. And so I'm not saying that they are doing a great job. I guess I wanted to make the point because I've heard testimony not just today, but in other sessions with the council about this problem. And I want to suggest to you that perhaps even if they did a fantastic job of what they are supposed to do, and I know from testimony today they're not, but if they were, I guess I'm suggesting that that's not sufficient. And and that treating this as a agency performance problem, which it is, but if we treat it solely as an agency performance problem, we're not going to solve this problem. So I'm suggesting that in addition, we take some of these cases, work them to the infinite degree with the help of the community, the ANCs and the neighbors, and see if we can see whether they're using today's tools that we can bring these properties into compliance. And if we can't, then I think that will be illustrative to the council that some changes are needed. I don't see that there's follow through on these properties, so we would ever know whether we get them back because there's an inspection and then they list it in the tax and then we wait to see what happens and a permit is issued, et cetera. And it seems to me that people go off to work on other problems. And what we found with other departments, like the Department of Transportation, is if you don't stay on the issue with them, it falls down their list of action items. And so these transportation issues don't get fixed. And I would think the same is true for DCRA. So I'm just suggesting there's a lot of energy in the community that we are not tapping into, and we ought to just force the issue on a subset of these cases and get them fixed.
Well, I'm going to take this a little bit further with you. Then I'm going to see if Commissioner Brooks, Allison Brooks, is back. It would be great if DCRA was proactive about vacant properties, but they're so far behind with regard to accurately classifying and keeping the classification on vacant properties that let's just accept the system the way it is, because there are already several thousand vacant properties. And so they are responsive. But if you ask them when a property, they were first notified, they don't have a record. And there's no amount of community involvement that's going to change that. The auditor said their record keeping was horrible in 2017. I've discovered the same thing, and I'm getting testimony either at these hearings or outside these hearings where other people are finding that their record keeping is terrible. So they can't tell you when a property was reported. You heard Commissioner Speck testify that if the community wants to look at the inspection report, they can't get it. I don't quite know what they're doing with the inspection reports, because I look at some of these properties and they're clearly blighted, and yet they're classified as vacant. Well, if you go through Kathy Patterson's audit from 2017, she notes that out of the 31 properties, a number of them, the inspector said it was vacant, and yet the classification wasn't changed, or blighted, and it wasn't classified as blighted. So it doesn't even matter what the inspection report is. And if you ask DCRA why, they can't tell you. And then DCRA is constantly changing the classification of properties. And if you ask them why, they won't tell you. I don't think they can tell you because they're not keeping records. I know that if we look at Scout or the other two databases that DCRA has, information is not there. Those databases are unreliable. But Kathy Patterson made it clear in her report that when an inspector changes the classification, there ought to be a record of why. There ought to be a piece of paper or an electronic document that explains why. And if there is, DCRA is not producing it. They didn't produce it to the auditor in 2017. Took them almost 4 weeks to respond to my last oversight question about 4 properties, one of which was 2900 Military Road. DCRA has the ability to retroactively reclassify property as vacant. So when the developer at Military Road walked away, DCRA could have gone back and said, all your permits were bogus. We never did any legitimate construction. But they didn't. And they only reclassified it after this came to light at a public hearing of the council. And the council can't have a hearing on 3,000 properties. We're just not going to do that. So I want to make it clear here that the problem is DCRA, and they shouldn't be off the hook. If they were legitimately record keeping and classifying and following through, then they could come to us and say, we don't have enough staff or we need something more, but they're not doing that. And in fact, last year, I think you were at the budget hearing, DCRA testified that they had enough staff for everything. They didn't need any more staff. And it's clear that, well, I don't know. I mean, they say they have 3 inspectors or 3 people handling vacant properties for the city. You know, vacant properties don't change day to day. They're vacant year to year. And you only have to classify them once. In fact, I think that's actually a problem too, is that DCRA isn't even keeping accurate records of what it's telling Office of Tax and Revenue. So I was looking at the 2900 Military Road this morning because I knew Commissioner Speck was going to be here. And let me see, they have reclassified that property 6 times in the past 20 months. 6 times in the past 20 months, they've changed the tax class. And if you look at, as of April 5th, what the tax classification was for that property, in 2019, it was class 3, and then in the second half, class 1, and then in the following years, class 3. Why was it class 1 for that 1 6-month period? And I can find those kinds of anomalies with a lot of properties.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could reply.
Yes.
You know, I know the least about this subject than all the people on this group, so I say this humbly. But if I agree with everything you say, and I have no reason not to, clearly DCRA needs to do a better job. I'm suggesting to you that even if they did, it would not be sufficient. And take the case that I put in my testimony. It was classified as vacant in 2015, and now it's blighted. I'm not sure exactly when that went in, but very recently. And it's still a mess. So as far as I can tell, DCRA has done what it is authorized to do for that property, and still a problem. And so I'm just saying that we need to think of this, I'm suggesting, on 2 dimensions. One is DCRA needs to clean up its act, as you suggest. And secondly, we need to ask for some of these properties. For instance, there are 25, I've listed 25 properties that in my testimony that have been on the blighted list for 3 years. What do we need to do about those 25 blighted properties to get them back into shape? They're classified correctly, but what are we going to do about it? So I'm suggesting, as a cheap way of doing this, that maybe not too cheap, but to involve the people who really care about this, including, in addition to yourself, of course, but you're on the council. I'm saying the ANCs and the neighborhoods really care about this, and we should take some of these cases and be a bulldog on them and not let them go until something happens. And if it doesn't happen, we will know more than we know today about why it's not happening, because perhaps the city doesn't have enough tools to make it happen. So that's I'm saying two highways here. One, get DCRA to do what they're doing, but perhaps recognize that that's not going to be sufficient.
Yes, and I'm not willing to recognize it's not sufficient until they get what they're doing now right, because otherwise they rely on the, well, we don't have enough resources. But the properties that you attached to your testimony, did you check the tax records or just the vacant property database?
Yes, it's listed correctly. They owe a lot of money, but I don't think they've paid it.
Yeah. Is Commissioner Allison Brooks back? I see her now twice on my screen. Thank you, Commissioner.
So I don't know why I'm on twice. I see that as well, but I am here.
Well, thank you for your testimony. I have some questions for you. On the first page of your statement, you say, in one example, in 4B02, there's a house that was unoccupied for over a decade. Is the one that you then identify on the second page as 6700 6th Street?
Yes, it is the same house.
Okay. And did you check the tax status on these different properties?
For 6700 6th Street, it is paid.
No, I mean what their tax class is, whether they're class 3 or class 4 or class 1.
No, I did not.
Okay. I personally visited 5732 Fifth Street. I believe it was last week.
Mhm.
If I was really adept technologically, I would put a picture on the screen, but I can't.
Okay.
Or I could, I'm afraid I would disconnect everybody. That property is owned by Elite Holdings LLC of Alexandria, Virginia.
Mhm.
The value of the property's increased from $275,000 is apparently what they paid for it, and it's now assessed at $407,000, almost $400,000. It looks like Elite Holdings walked away from the site in April 2019. Rather than revoke the construction exemption, DCRA did nothing. It left in place the Class 1 rate. Even though when the developer walked away, the property was blighted.
Mhm.
And again, I wish I could show the picture. The front of the house, I'm assuming you've personally seen the house.
Yes, I have.
The front of the house is just plastered with notices.
Mhm.
And I looked at the notices and then I looked at the DCRA database, and the notices aren't even in the database.
Right. And that's the case for several of the properties. It's as if they wanted us to know they responded to our request without really responding to our request.
Well, the thing with 5732 is that the DCRA left in place the Class 1 rate. A year later, after the developer had walked away, they prospectively, that means going forward, classified it as Class 3,
Mhm.
but not Class 4, which is blighted. And as of the council's hearing on May 10th, where the council member from Ward 4 brought this up, it was still classified as vacant.
Mhm.
After the hearing, they went back out and they changed it to blighted. So I could feel good that these hearings are doing something.
Mhm.
Isn't the way it should be.
But again, it's doing something because commissioners are reaching a fevered pitch and they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing. It should be the agency pushing and pushing and pushing and addressing these issues, right? We should be working in concert, but we shouldn't be driving the bus.
You'd mentioned with regard to 5732, it has abandoned truck and another vehicle in the back. You've looked at the rear of the house?
Not recently, Commissioner LaRoya Huff has gone back there.
Because it's missing.
Well, that's a good thing if it's gone. We've been
No,
trying to
it's
get.
not gone. The back of the house is missing.
Oh, wow. No, I can't say that I've seen that. No.
Now, there was plywood put up, but and the plywood is deteriorated and they're whole. So it's clearly blighted. And this is a duplex. So there's a property owner who lives just on the other side of the party wall.
Right. Right.
Your testimony was helpful, and we will at some point look at these different properties.
I did want to add one thing if it's possible. When Commissioner Speck was speaking, he mentioned how the owners and the banks are trying to get out from under the fines. We have an example of that as well at 6109 3rd Street. When we called the bank, in this example, I think it's the case of somebody who watched a little bit too much TV and watched those shows about people that flip houses and thought it, could be done well, easily, quickly. She bought this house, got involved in the process and realized it's not that simple. And so now the bank has become engaged. The lender's trying to recoup their money in a similar example to Mr. Speck. Only he called and asked for help getting out from under all of the fines so that he could sell the house. He wants us to release him of responsibility of those fines. And so that's clearly not helping either. The fines themselves aren't doing any good. If he felt like he could call someone and ask them to eliminate them all.
True. And, you know, it's important that there's a balance there. But as I said to Commissioner Speck, we need to be careful that we aren't creating a precedent, if you will, that these LLCs can come in like 5732, essentially destroy a property, leave it vacant for 4 years, which really is a hardship on the community, and then walk away with a profit on the assessed value of the house, or maybe walk away breaking even when what they did was very destructive.
Well, along the Kennedy Street corridor, it gets even worse. We have what I would call a professional developer who's leveraged multiple properties between the 100 blocks and 700 blocks of Kennedy Street Northwest, and none of them have been occupied, but they continue to make purchases and come before ANCs and show beautiful plans to what they plan to do, but do nothing. And all of the buildings are deteriorating.
Yeah.
100 block of the 71 Kennedy Street, 201 Kennedy Street, the 400 block of Kennedy Street, the 500 block of Kennedy Street, I believe the 700 block of Kennedy Street, all have properties owned by Coloma River Development, and none of them are being cared for. And then in that case, they're using the house on First Street Northwest as the equivalent of the Fort Totten transfer station. So they're not good neighbors. Developers aren't invested, whether they're companies or they're small LLCs, they're not invested in these communities. You know, they're looking to make quick money. And if they can't, because it takes a long time to get permits, or they don't get a raise permit or something of that nature, then they lose interest and they move on to the next project, and then these houses languish.
Well, that's another aspect of what DCRA could be doing differently. So we changed a couple of years ago to require that LLCs have to disclose more information about who the principals are. DCRA has the ability to look in its own records to find out if there's a common ownership, or maybe not ownership, but common participation by some of these bad actors, and then flagging them for scrutiny, but they're not doing that. Testimony, Commissioner, you mentioned 5612 First Street.
Yes.
And you mentioned 119 Kennedy Street.
Yes.
You mentioned the other properties that the developer has. Would you mind putting that in writing and giving it to us?
Absolutely.
Okay. What I'm interested in here are the multiple properties that this same individual or company is involved with.
Okay.
And if you can add any description about the different properties, that would be helpful too.
Okay. Are you interested in photos? Because I have photos of all these different properties.
If you want, send them.
Okay. All right.
If I get my newsletter out this week, I'll have 5732 5th Street Northeast in it, and there'll be a couple photos there. You'll see.
Wonderful. You will make Commissioner Huff very happy.
Okay. That concludes my questions. I want to thank each of the commissioners who took their time out to be here today. I think this has been helpful, and I hope that this puts a little bit more pressure on DCRA. And we will be having a hearing with DCRA and their budget in June. I'm not recalling the date offhand, but it's, I think, the first full week or second week of June that the Committee of the Whole is having its budget hearing. And we'll be talking about this again then. So the record in this matter will close.
Councilmember Mendelson?
Yes, Commissioner Lewis.
I have my hand raised.
Oh, good. I didn't see that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. But I agree with everything that you have said with regards to DCRA and their responsibility for these vacant and blighted properties, and ensuring that the the different classifications of these properties are changed accordingly. However, I just would like to also bring to the attention of the council that the other agencies have responsibilities as well around these vacant and blighted properties, such as MPD with no loitering. We are constantly being told that they cannot move the crowds away from these vacant and blighted properties and that they need to be compassionate. But these are having a serious impact on the residents that live nearby these properties. Also, the Office of Attorney Generals, if they don't have enough I guess, arrests that are being done at these properties, they cannot consider it a nuisance property and aren't able to do anything. Then we have, as I testified, the zoning commission that are giving out extensions over and over and over and over and over again. And when they see this is happening, that something needs to be done to stop them from, repeatedly getting these extensions. So I believe that there is not only DCRIA, but there needs to be laws that are put into effect that will not allow developers to get extensions, tax breaks, and other things of that nature, so that it would encourage them, sort of put a fire underneath their feet and get them moving with regards to developing these areas. Thank you.
Well, thank you, but let me say a couple things on that. OTR does with the classification what DCRA tells it to do. It's on DCRA. With regard to Metropolitan Police Department, the police are probably more sensitive today than ever with regard to what extent are they hassling or harassing or getting beyond their mission, which is probable cause. The law is clear. This is Supreme Court, that it is not illegal to loiter. It doesn't mean that the police can't do anything, but they're probably hesitant to do anything like if there's blocking of a sidewalk. But we don't have a loitering statute, and it's because the Supreme Court.
I understand that.
And then with regard to the zoning commission, I didn't think of this earlier, but the ANC could pass a resolution asking the zoning commission to deny the extension. To say after 13 years, am I right? 13 years.
Yes.
The developer needs to apply anew for that. The comprehensive plan just changed. Our standards for development have changed. And the zoning commission needs to look at the PUD in a new light, and that it should not be extended.
Okay. Yes, that is for years we were so desperate to get this development, this property developed, that we went along and we agreed to the extension thinking that something would happen, but he's duped us all year after year after year after year, and yet another year he's going to use COVID-19 as an excuse to get another extension.
As I say, I think if the ANC adopts a resolution, articulates some reasons like the change in the comprehensive plan, like that the zoning regulations favor that renewals don't occur more than once, that 13 years is an awfully long time, and that there's nothing that it would be dismissed without prejudice, so there's nothing that would prevent the developer from coming back. But the developer should be required to come back.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Johnson.
Yes, I just wanted to just echo those sentiments from Commissioner Lewis, that we have those same challenges on Georgia Avenue of developers buying sort of parcels and properties and letting them fall into disrepair. Problem.
Yes. Well, if they're being assessed, if they're being taxed at the $5 or $10 rate, maybe that would change the economics.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not for big developers like Joe Mammel that have money. He can pay the money. So something else needs to be done to encourage him.
Chairman Mendelson, may I say?
Wind this down, but then faces keep popping up. Commissioner Bowser.
May I say that it was Coloma River property that's on the 400 block of Kennedy Street. And I mentioned that, and I just want to re-mention it because Chair Brooks in the 100 block of Kennedy Street, which is in her SMD, but he is full. That company is buying properties all along Kennedy Street, the 400 block, the 700 block, and keeping them in bad shape until who knows when they'll do construction.
Again, the purpose of the vacant property and blighted property tax rates is to change the economic equation so that it's less likely that a speculator will buy the property and hold it without doing anything. So all this testimony has been helpful. Again, I want to thank each of you. I want to thank you for taking your time to testify this morning. The record is, as I said before, will be open until 5 o'clock on June. I put it away because I see more faces appearing. June 1st. I'm trying to adjourn this hearing. Commissioner Patel, did you want to be recognized?
All I just wanted to say was thank you for the opportunity to testify today. And, I just want to personally invite you to come back to ANC 2A to come visit us whenever you have time.
Okay, be happy to.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, I'm going to adjourn the hearing. The time is 11:16 in the morning, and this roundtable is